So in chapters 10 to 13, I really could feel Paul's heart towards the people as he wrote. He was openly showing his concern for their spiritual growth with much vulnerability and boasting about his sufferings, sharing his weaknesses, but still admonishing them as much as he could, like a father would, admonish his children. He was writing this letter at the time ahead of his visit to them, and he was really pulling out all the stops to help them grow secure in their Christianity and act together before and get their act together before his arrival, because he was making it clear that when he arrived, he wasn't going to, take it lightly, especially with those who were spreading false doctrine, because there were clearly people who were doubting his ministry and doubting the fact that he was sent from God, and he was letting them know that when he came, he was going to wage spiritual warfare against those who were false believers and spreading lies about him among the church. Now, from all indications, right, these people considered Paul all bark and no bites because his letters appeared forceful, but in real life, in person, he wasn't so. I feel like this was probably because he was very passionate about his faith and wanted them to grow, and which was why he was like that. Because I looked at it in context. In real life, sometimes when I talk about Christ or talk about my experiences as a Christian or the gospel, like I'm talking in a way that afterwards I'm like, girl, you don't know this much. So sometimes, I'm very passionate and I'm very, so people will think, oh, she must be very forceful, but in real life, I know that I'm not like that. Well, I like to think that I'm not like that. So I could feel, what was probably coming through to the people from his letters. So maybe his letters is sounding, oh, you must do this. And then in real life, he was this maybe very softly spoken guy and all. So I feel like it's all empowerment of the Holy Spirit. That is the Holy Spirit that gives you that passion and that bark. But in real life, you have no bites. Who knows? Now, the church in Corinth was actually considered the most wicked and overindulgent church of the time in the New Testament. And Paul wanted to make sure that they were presented as clean to God. But he had to contend with some so-called super apostles who were distorting the faith, lying to the people, and taking advantage of them. When Paul listed all the things that he endured for the sake of the gospel in chapter 11 from 22 to 23, I was shook. Everything from beatings to drownings to famine to cold to heat to... But he embraced all that God had called him to, even though his life, from the outside looking in, from that list, his life looked really tragic. But God was with him and he leaned more into God and let God's strength be made perfect in his weakness and in his suffering. That helped me to put that very popular verse into context. Imagine going through all the things that Paul went through and being able to say, God's strength is made perfect in your weakness. It was just so amazing. So through his suffering, his focus and his heart was for the churches and the people that he was nourishing as well. He was an exemplary leader. That's all I have to say, because from the way he was vulnerable and poured out his whole soul to these people and let them know how passionately he was working for them, it just showed how exemplary a leader he was. To be honest, leadership isn't easy. And I think we should always just make time to pray for our leaders, the people who lead us in church, at work, in our families. Leadership is no small task. So now let me share my hashtag Getting to Know God lesson with you. God's grace is sufficient. End of story. That's all I really took away from this. In chapter 12, verse 9, when Paul talked about the thorn in his flesh, he said that he would boast in his weaknesses so that he could access the power of Christ to withstand the weaknesses, right? So if we acknowledge that our sufficiency is of Christ, we allow him to strengthen us through the trials that we go through. So praising God in difficult times is very, very hard, but it's actually a very powerful act to receive strength to endure the weaknesses or the trials or the tribulation that we are going through. Now, that was my lesson. What was yours? I'd love to hear it. Thank you so much for joining me today. I look forward to sharing again with you tomorrow, God willing. Have a wonderful day.